Wars. They typically conjure images of epic battles between nations, of clashing ideologies and territorial disputes. But what about a war against birds, specifically emus? It might sound like the setup to a joke, but in 1932, Australia found itself embroiled in just such a conflict. The Emu War, as it's now infamously known, was a bizarre chapter in Australian history, pitting frustrated farmers and a bewildered military against thousands of these large, flightless birds. This wasn't a battle for land or resources in the traditional sense. It was a fight for survival, for crops, and for a way of life threatened by an unexpected enemy. The emus, driven by drought and hunger, descended upon Western Australia's farmlands in droves. Their target? The wheat fields, already struggling under the weight of the Great Depression. The emus were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. The farmers, desperate for a solution, appealed to the government for help. What followed was a series of engagements as absurd as they were ineffective. Armed with Lewis machine guns, soldiers were deployed to combat the avian menace. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, quite a bit. The emus, surprisingly agile and resilient, proved to be a formidable enemy, often outmaneuvering and outlasting the army. The Emu War was a resounding military failure, a testament to the unpredictable nature of, well, nature. The emus, despite facing down a hail of bullets, continued to thrive, their numbers barely dented by the government's efforts. The farmers, left to fend for themselves, eventually adapted. They built better fences, employed new farming techniques, and learned to coexist, albeit uneasily, with their feathered foes. The 1930s dawned with a chill that extended far beyond the winter months. The Great Depression, a global economic crisis of unprecedented scale, had cast a long shadow over much of the world. Australia, heavily reliant on its agricultural exports, found itself particularly vulnerable. Wheat, a staple crop and a cornerstone of the Australian economy, saw its price plummet in the global market. For the farmers who tilled the vast Australian outback, the world seemed to be crumbling around them. Years of drought had already parched the land, yielding meager harvests. Now, with the depression squeezing their incomes, many farmers were pushed to the brink. Debts mounted, farms were foreclosed, and families struggled to put food on the table. The promise of a good life on the land, a life of hard work and self-reliance, seemed to be slipping away. The Australian government, grappling with its own economic woes, offered little in the way of immediate relief. Farmers, accustomed to the capriciousness of nature, now faced an economic storm of a different kind. They had always contended with droughts, floods, and pests, but this felt different. This felt like a losing battle against forces beyond their control. Amidst the economic despair, another problem emerged, one that would become symbolic of the farmers' struggles and the government's futile attempts to control the uncontrollable. The emu, a large, flightless bird and an iconic symbol of Australia, began appearing in uncharacteristically large numbers on the edges of Western Australia's wheat belt. Emus, nomadic by nature, typically roamed vast distances in search of food and water. However, prolonged drought conditions had driven them westward, towards the cultivated fields that promised sustenance. What was once an occasional nuisance now morphed into a full-blown crisis. Thousands upon thousands of emus, their powerful legs carrying them across the landscape with surprising speed, descended upon the farmlands. The farmers, already grappling with economic ruin, now faced a new threat to their livelihoods. The emus, unfazed by fences and undeterred by human presence, feasted on the wheat crops. They trampled seedlings, devoured ripening grain, and left behind a trail of destruction in their wake. The farmers, their patience worn thin by hardship, had had enough. The pleas of the farmers reached George Pearce, Australia's Minister of Defence. Pearce, a World War I veteran, was known for his no-nonsense approach. Faced with an emu invasion, Pearce saw an opportunity to protect citizens. The Australian government declared war on the emus. Orders were issued, and soldiers were dispatched to the wheat belt. Armed with Lewis machine guns, they embarked on their mission. Leading the charge was Major G.P.W. Meredith. The arrival of the military was met with hope and skepticism by the farmers. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any other in military history. The initial encounter between the soldiers and their feathered foes took place on November 2nd, 1932, near the town of Campion. Major Meredith deployed his men and their Lewis guns, hoping to catch the emus off guard. The soldiers waited with bated breath as a large flock of the birds ambled into their line of fire. Then all hell broke loose. The soldiers opened fire, but the emus scattered in all directions. These were no ordinary birds, they were battle-hardened survivors. The emus' powerful legs propelled them across the terrain with surprising speed. The soldiers struggled to adjust their aim. The Lewis guns proved inadequate against these fast-moving targets. The ground was littered with spent cartridges, but the emu casualty count remained low. Section 3. Evasive maneuvers. Outwitting the gunners. As news of the initial encounter spread, it was met with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. The mighty Australian Army, veterans of Gallipoli and the Western Front, had been held at bay by a flock of flightless birds. The emus, it seemed, were made of sterner stuff than anyone had anticipated. Undeterred, Major Meredith, his pride slightly bruised but his resolve intact, devised a new strategy. He ordered his men to pursue the emus in trucks, hoping to use their superior speed and maneuverability to gain the upper hand. The soldiers, their initial confidence shaken but their sense of duty intact, piled into their vehicles and gave chase. The Australian outback transformed into an unlikely battleground. The trucks roared across the dusty plains, kicking up clouds of red dirt as they attempted to outflank the elusive emus. But the emus, masters of their domain, proved to be frustratingly difficult to pin down. They darted between trees, zigzagged across open ground, and generally made a mockery of the soldiers' attempts to outmaneuver them. The soldiers, their faces caked with dust and sweat, found themselves firing wildly from their moving vehicles, their aim compromised by the bumpy ride and the emus' unpredictable movements. The trucks, ill-suited for this type of terrain, bounced and swerved, their occupants clinging on for dear life as they unleashed another volley of ineffective fire. Section 4. A humiliating retreat. The emus prevail. Days turned into weeks, and the war against the emus dragged on, each encounter as futile and farcical as the last. The soldiers, their initial enthusiasm replaced by frustration and admiration, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Major Meredith watched in dismay as his men expended thousands of rounds with little to show for it. The emus were adept at dodging bullets, and appeared wherever the soldiers weren't. It was as if they were toying with their pursuers, leading them on a wild chase. On December 8, 1932, the military operation was officially called off. The soldiers packed up and retreated, leaving the emus to claim victory. A change of tactics, a sliver of hope. The initial setbacks didn't completely deter the Australian government. The farmers' pleas for assistance still rang in their ears. Conceding defeat wasn't an option. Major Meredith regrouped his forces and reassessed their strategy. A new plan was hatched, relying more on cunning than brute force. Soldiers set up ambushes near water sources. They embraced this new approach with renewed vigor. The emus, however, seemed unfazed by this change in tactics. It was as if they possessed an uncanny ability to anticipate the soldiers' movements. They would approach a waterhole cautiously, scanning for any sign of danger. The slightest movement, the glint of sunlight, was enough to send them scattering. The ambushes often resulted in nothing more than a few startled birds and a cloud of dust. The emus were fighting their own kind of war, relying on stealth and evasion. They moved in small, dispersed groups, making them difficult to target. They seemed to appear and disappear at will, melting into the landscape. The soldiers were ill-equipped to deal with such an unorthodox adversary. Major Meredith, frustrated by the emus' resilience, remarked, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." The press turned his words into a national punchline, making the Emu War a media circus. Public ridicule and lack of success forced the government to call off the Emu War on December 8, 1932. The emus continued to roam, a reminder of the limits of human intervention. Farmers, realizing the futility of eradication, began to innovate and adapt. They shifted from trying to eliminate the emus to coexisting with them, marking a turning point. Farmers built sturdy fences and adopted new planting techniques to protect their crops. These efforts proved more effective than military action. The emus, unable to breach the new barriers, became a common sight at the fence lines. The Emu War became a cautionary tale and a source of national pride. It highlighted the importance of respecting nature's power and resilience. The Emu War reminds us of the importance of resilience and adaptability. Both farmers and emus demonstrated remarkable resilience in their own ways. The Emu War has become a global phenomenon, inspiring memes and jokes. A monument in Campion, Western Australia, stands as a tribute to this unusual conflict. The Emu War's humor lies in the clash between human hubris and nature's indifference. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the best response to defeat is laughter. The Emu War highlights the challenges of human intervention in nature. It calls for greater understanding and respect for the natural world. The Emu War has left a legacy of laughter and learning. It urges us to approach environmental challenges with humility and humor. The Emu War ended in a victory for the birds, highlighting nature's unpredictability. The emus' guerrilla tactics outmatched the Australian military's conventional warfare. The Emu War serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of human intervention. It reminds us to be stewards of the planet, respecting the intricate web of life.